Josh, are you seeing the screen? Stormwater Success 201?
No.
You're not. Well, I am. Hold on just a second here and let me figure out what's wrong. How about now?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, great. Well, I realize that we've got some new folks with us tonight. Welcome. I'm Steve Miller, and I'm one of the people who helped to put this presentation together. The other one is Josh Clark. Josh Clark is a restoration coordinator there with the Watershed Stewards Academy, and he's also responsible for the Stormwater Success course, and he's going to be helping out tonight. I have had some problems with my computer with Google Meet. Fortunately, not last night, but we've got a backup in case you lose me. Josh has got the slides. I'll just dial in and we'll continue on from there. But if you were with us last night, you remember that that first slide that I showed was a picture of a thunderstorm, because that's where our stormwater originates from. And then here eventually is where some of that runoff is going to end up, and that's in the Chesapeake Bay. And the slide that you see on the left-hand side, it was taken back in November of 2000. That's the Severn River. That was after a storm event, and you can just see all the sediment that is flowing through the river as a result of erosion that's taking place there caused by stormwater runoff. The picture on the right-hand side is also a picture of the Chesapeake Bay, and that was taken in June of 2018. And that's when a report had come out and really boasted about some of the water quality objectives being achieved. Still only 42% of the Chesapeake Bay at that time meeting the water quality standards that we're trying to meet through stormwater management, but it was definitely an improvement. So what we'll be talking about here tonight is we're going to finish up our discussion about non-structural BMPs. We talked last night about bioswales and bioretention areas. And we'll pick up and talk about the other ones that are most common to HOAs. Then we'll talk about structural best management practices, and that will be principally the stormwater management ponds, open channels, step pool, stormwater conveyance systems, those kinds of things. Then I will talk about maintenance for all of those systems. And we'll generalize it, but also we'll get specific to talking about maybe some things that you should think about doing in terms of actually putting a plan together that you can use for a request for proposal when you start talking to contractors. And then finally, I will use some examples from our community of different stormwater issues that we've had, how much it cost us to do the repairs that were necessary, and then also our experience with requesting a modification on one of our best management practices with inspections and permits. Like last night, because I know that this is going to take probably 50 minutes to go through, if you have any questions, I would ask you to go ahead and use the chat feature, put your question in there, or if you've got a comment, you need something clarified, go ahead and put that into the chat room, and then Josh will be monitoring that, and he will go ahead and interrupt me if it's necessary so that we can get your question answered. Otherwise, please wait until the end. And then the other thing is, I know that I did not mention this, but we're recording it. We don't know yet whether or not we'll post it or we'll just use it for some QA. But in any case, if you have any objections to that, please let us know. All right. When we showed the slide last night of the different types of private BMPs that exist here with the county, there were 39 different varieties of those. The number one type of BMP that came up was rooftop disconnect, and a close fourth place, I think, was non-rooftop disconnect. And you take a look at this, and it's just so simple. All you're doing is taking water that comes from your downspout that otherwise might be directed onto your driveway and straight into a storm drain, and instead putting it over onto the grass and letting it get filtered and infiltrate in that area. Now, that's the short answer. There's really a whole lot more to this because, first of all, you can't get credit for this as a developer unless the lot is at least 6,000 square feet. And the other thing is the impervious surface from where this runoff comes from is limited to 500 square feet. So it's only going to come from a portion of your roof. And then the other thing is wherever that water exits, and it has to exit at least 10 feet away from your driveway or any other impervious surface, there has to be 75 feet of disconnect area. That can be just simply a vegetated area. It could be a swale. It could be a channel. But the developer needs to have that amount of room to allow that infiltration and that filtration of that runoff. If they don't have that, then you have to add on another device. It could be a rain garden. It could end up being a dry well, which I'm going to talk about here in the next slide. Or it could end up being some other infiltration device that will allow the groundwater to be contained and seep through those particular devices. So this is a very popular method for the developer to get credit for managing stormwater runoff, and they also get a reduction in the total amount of impervious surface that they have to consider in all their calculations for determining the size of any other BMPs that will be put within the development. So this is the most common device. Now for HOA, what's the impact on this? Well, as I've gone around to different HOAs, when they end up moving the water 10 feet away from the house, sometimes it's done underground through a pipe, and then there's some kind of plug at the end of this that pops up, you know, during a storm to release the water. Not surprisingly, when you've got landscapers out there with heavy mowing equipment, just like when they damage an irrigation sprinkler head, there's a good chance they're going to end up damaging the heads of these. And so you need to know, again, in your rules and regulations, in your declarations, who's actually got responsibility for maintaining these. And these systems, of course, will fail if the gutters aren't kept clean, because you're going to end up having debris go down and it will get into these narrower pipes, you know, where the water outflows into the yard, and it'll get clogged. So maintaining clean gutters is definitely something that you want to do. So here's a dry well. It's not complicated again. It's a basin of gravel underneath the ground, and it can only be put into the ground if the soil is suitable, because the water's got to percolate into the surrounding soil. And it gets cleaned by going through all the gravel that is there within this device. And so the water comes straight off of the downspout. It goes underground through a pipe and then goes into this particular dry well. And you can access a dry well. If you take a look there at the diagram, there is a cap here at the top. Sometimes they're above ground, but sometimes they'll be flush with the ground. You unscrew that, and then you take a look down, and 48 hours after a storm, you really shouldn't see any water in there at all. And you definitely shouldn't see any debris. If you've got any kind of leaves or debris, you want to find a way to get that out, because it's clogging up the system and it definitely won't be working the way that it should be. These systems are designed only, again, to capture about 500 square feet of impervious surface runoff. So in big storms, you're going to find that a lot of water is going to overflow outside this overflow pipe that's connected to your downspout, and it is going to go to wherever that that overflow pipe is. And you can see on the right-hand side, it's likely to go onto the sidewalk here and go down the driveway. So it won't really be disconnected anymore. The other thing is that in this particular case, and I've been in a couple of communities like this dry well in a townhouse development is actually underneath the driveway. So I tell you, if I owned one of these systems, I'd be making sure I'm cleaning those gutters all the time, and I'm checking for any debris inside this device, because if you do that, they're likely to last 25 or 30 years. And you certainly don't want to be tearing up your driveway any earlier than is necessary to have to repair and make these things work again in the future. Once again, just like all the other BMPs that I'm talking about, this is on that inspection checklist when the inspectors come out from inspections and permits. This is another one of those BMPs that developers like to put into a community because they get extra credit for this as well. And it's sheet flow to conservation area or sheet flow to a buffer area that exists around the community. So on the left-hand side, that's actually a forest conservation easement. It's all wooded area. It slopes down eventually to a stream that's down at the bottom. And what you've essentially got is you've got downspouts on it from the townhouses that are on the right-hand side, spilling out their stormwater, and then it goes down this nicely filled-in lawn. Then it goes across this area right here, which is just gravel. And I went out recently to a development. I actually saw them out there with a backhoe, and they were digging down about 3.5 or 4 feet and then filling it in with filter cloth and with all of this gravel. And as the water goes across this, it slows down and it begins to infiltrate and then get cleaned as it goes through all that gravel to eventually helping to replenish the groundwater. And then after that, it continues on its way, continuing to get filtered by the turf until it makes its way down to the stream below. It's really important that the community not treat this like a trail. It is absolutely not a walking path. It's a BMP. You do not want to press down all this gravel because then it's no longer effective. It's going to be just like asphalt. The stormwater is going to go right across it, and you're going to have to repair it. And repairing it usually involves going back and digging up all that gravel, at least down to 2 feet or so, and then replacing it with new gravel and potentially some filter cloth. So I'm sure that most communities don't know this, but if I was in that HOA, I'd make sure that my owners did know about it. And that includes any kind of heavy equipment going across it. You want to talk to your landscapers and minimize that. But this is, in fact, a BMP. And if you see any erosion that's occurring on any of the turf before the water gets to these BMPs, you need to repair that because all it's going to do is carry sediment across that gravel. That's also going to clog it. It's not going to be working, and you're going to have to replace it. Every one of our communities, I think, has a dry grass swale in it. And I mean, they're everywhere. And some of them are deeper than others. Some of them are actually vegetated. And when you have got one of these, the main thing is that you just make sure the grass is growing in that area. That's what's providing most of the filtration of the water that's going through those areas. However, some of them that are in steeper areas, the swales will actually have some check dams. They go from one side to the other. They're not very high. They're usually made of stone, and they're going to end up slowing the water down a bit as it goes through that swale, help prevent some of the erosion, and also contain some of the runoff to allow for a little bit of infiltration and filtration. If you start seeing ponding that lasts for more than 72 hours, you've got an issue. And probably what's happened is you've had sediment that's been flowing into that swale. We've seen it out here. I have it behind my property. Every time the landscapers come out and they use their mowing equipment behind my yard, just from development that kept occurring upstream of my home, you know, when the community was being built, some of that sediment came down into my yard. It's leveled out my swale a little bit, and I'm eventually going to have to go in there and regrade that area to allow the water to flow through there and not pond.
Steve, we just got a question from Renee about the sheet flow into a conservation area.
Yeah.
She asks, why not plant these areas of sheet flow and or in the gravel area? It looks way too much like a walking path.
You're right. I mean, I agree. And that surprises me. Now, let me say something here. This one is kind of unusual. The one that I just saw was one that it would have been clear it was not a walking path. But this one to me looks like a walking path. The only thing that some of them have got that this one does not is that along this side, there would be a shelf, and that's not the correct stormwater term for it. But what it does is it essentially slows the water down. It's like a little weir. It slows the water down here, and then the excess water spills over and goes more slowly across this area. That might be an indication of somebody that this is a BMP, but this is just a homeowner education issue because this is the way it was designed, and I wouldn't spend a lot of time modifying it. Okay, so
Steve.
here's one community, and you can see on the left-hand side a swale that does not have a lot of turf in it. You can also see, because it's got the same kind of device as this slide does, the water just comes straight off the street. So look at all the debris that came off the street into this particular swale. And I'll tell you, I've been out to a couple communities, and I've been surprised by seeing weeds or grass actually growing outside of these devices, because there's that much sediment that went into these devices, and they need to be cleaned out because all that sediment otherwise is going into this area and doing that fill-in that I talked about before. So get healthy turf in this area, keep the streets clean, and make it look more like the one on the right.
Steve, we just got a question about grass swales as well. The photos seem to show turf grass areas. Shouldn't these have native grasses with deeper roots to better hold and filter stormwater? If yes, residents would have to expect less mowing of the taller native grasses such as swale.
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you, that's the biggest challenge. And I talked about that last night, is the aesthetics, because ideally you would in fact be leaving the grass growing higher. I showed you 3 to 6 inches there on that other slide. But when these are right there in the middle of your homes, or you've got swales in the front of your homes or directly in the back of your homes, nobody wants to see a large amount of grass growing back there. And it's also an issue with your landscape. You know, it just requires extra work to navigate around all that. So I'm telling you what you should think about in here. And not only that, as you can imagine in this, when you put these swales in between these high townhouses or single family homes, depending upon where you're located, there's not a lot of sunlight coming in there at times. So there are without a doubt challenges on doing things I'm telling you you should do versus the environment that you're actually operating in, whether it be an HOA caring about aesthetics or just simply the environment in which the grass and the other plants grow. Okay, there are a number of communities out there that have got permeable pavement. Once again, I'm convinced that there's many owners that don't recognize the fact that they have those. On the right-hand side, in fact, you can see here the permeable pavement almost looks the same as the asphalt. There's just a little bit of marking right here that would suggest that they're different. And you really have to go and stand over this to appreciate it is definitely not the same as asphalt. And it is actually a composition of layers of material. And unlike if you went out on my asphalt driveway and I poured a glass of water on it, it would immediately beat up and it would run down the driveway trying to find the lowest spot. You drop a glass of water on this and it actually goes into the pavement. It's porous and it's designed to be put onto soil conditions where it will allow it to infiltrate in the ground. If it doesn't, then they put drainage pipes underneath it, and that helps take that excess water, and that usually moves it off that pavement into a nearby BMP. And so the one on the right is asphalt. This one on the left is actually a paver that's permeable. It's a little bit more decorative. There is a chance of more weeds growing in between those cracks, however. And I'll talk right now about maintenance for these. The right way to maintain them is shown up there on the left-hand picture, and that is you actually bring a high-powered vacuum out, and that high-powered vacuum sucks whatever debris and sediment that is clogging pores. You want to keep those open and not become compacted. And so, you know, you have to probably do this at least once a year. I've been all over different websites. Some of them say do it as many as 4 times a year. Others say once a year. I think that it really, again, depends upon your environment, how clean the stormwater runoff is on your particular pavement. But the top picture on the right kind of gives you an idea. On the right-hand side, you've got asphalt, and you can see all those raindrops just, you know, hitting that and spattering every different direction. And on the left-hand side, where you've got the pervious pavement, it's just going straight into that pervious asphalt. The picture on the bottom, obviously, is a failed system. You should not see that at all. It should be going right into that pervious surface. And one of the things you have to be careful about, and we've only had one contractor that ever did this, but make sure they're not going to use sand during the wintertime, because sand will definitely challenge the operation of this system. Okay, I think we've all seen these kinds of stormwater management ponds within different communities that we either live in or that we visited. As I said last night, however, many of these ponds used to be in the far corners of the different developments, and now they are usually right smack in the middle of them. 2 out of 3 of ours are right along main roads. And the one thing that you need to ensure, and we talked a lot about this yesterday with the stormwater management plan, is who actually owns these. Is it your community? Is it publicly maintained by the county? And in some cases, are you potentially sharing your system with somebody else? Another nearby neighborhood, and you have joint responsibilities for maintenance, or at least the expenses of it. One of the things that was, again, a surprise to us was to see in our declarations that if any part of the area of our community that's dedicated to a public or governmental entity fails to properly maintain that area, then the HOA has a responsibility to take care of the issue. We have to budget for it. And part of this, I'm sure, is to ensure that we maintain property values. And so I just signed a contract today where we're going to have a landscaper come out and actually move plants around in 2 of our publicly maintained ponds, because the county does not have the resources to come out and do anything inside of these pond areas other than what I'm going to talk about here shortly. And we're actually going to plant some new plants that have died in that area. And I'll tell you, we exhausted this. We went to initially DPW, we went to the forester, we tried to find anybody that we could get trees from, and we did not have any luck with that. The other thing is that we also make sure that we take care of these trees, because the county's not going to come in and do any pruning or fertilizing or anything like that. This isn't just, by the way, for stormwater facilities. Those public road trees that you've got on any of the public roads in your neighborhood, usually fairly large trees, we just did structural pruning on those. The county's not going to come out and do structural pruning on those. They're only going to come out if you've got a branch that is in the way and is somehow affecting safety of emergency vehicles or others traveling through the neighborhood. And they certainly aren't going to come out and treat it for pests. And we had to take care of scale and other pests on our trees this past year. Then this is exactly, last night I showed some of the schematics, you know, for the different BMPs. This is taken out of the design manual. You have better graphics within your stormwater management plans, but it's fairly simple. You get stormwater runoff that comes into a forebay. Whatever sedimentation and other debris is within that initial thrust of stormwater, you try and capture it here within the forebay. The excess water spills off and goes then into a main pool area. And then whatever's excess from that in heavy storms, it begins to exit out through a low flow pipe and some other area where it will discharge. The drainage area for these ponds is scaled to such a size that it tries to ensure a certain minimum water level throughout the whole year. And it's very important for that because that wet level is what ends up helping to infiltrate whatever pollutants there are and allow it to settle down to the bottom of your particular stormwater pond. The county right now is experimenting with a new capability where it actually connects to this outflow area. And it can actually measure when the water level of your particular stormwater pond has reached high enough that it says, hey, in order to be ready for the next storm, I'm going to go ahead and let some of this water out. And it does that, gets it back to a water level that's then ready for the next big storm. And it'll be very interesting to see how that all works. There's a number of issues, as you can imagine, associated with that. But I think that that's pretty inventive, and it'll be easy. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. Okay, this one is a detention and infiltration pond. And as you can see by the picture on the top right, on any one given day when there's not a weather event, this is probably how it's going to look. It's going to be dry. Behind this particular stormwater pond is a step pool stormwater conveyance system. And it actually goes all the way down here to Deep Creek. So what happens is excess water that flows out of the stormwater pond goes down these series of little ponds. And then in between these ponds are these stone riffles. And the water will go into this pond. Some of the pollution and everything will start settling out down to the bottom. It goes across these, again, stone riffles. And these normally in summertime are vegetated. So it's also going through some vegetation down to the next pool, and then finally on its way out there to Deep Creek. And so it leaves in a much more controlled fashion. It's not going to cause all of that terrible gouging that you had before in various stream beds, and also just simply, ravines that were going down to the different streams. And this is what's helping to prevent all that sedimentation that you were having in the different creeks around you. So here's an example of the same device before a storm. And then here's during a pretty heavy storm. It's filled up the forebay, and it's also filled up the main basin. And the excess water is exiting out through the low flow pipe. And this is the low flow pipe. I mean, when you're there, it looks like it's coming out like a fire hose. And these different ponds that were empty before start filling up, and you can see it goes down in a nice controlled fashion through a series of rocks into a pond, and then it just keeps making its way down eventually into the stream. And I'll tell you, it's really kind of neat when you go out there during a storm, once where there wasn't water, there is, and it is just like being in nature and not watching this deluge of stormwater runoff racing down to the stream. I think they're pretty neat. And then 48 hours or 72 hours later, whatever's in your stormwater management plan, this is what it looks like again. So I'm going to now switch, and I'm going to talk about maintenance on these stormwater ponds. And I'm sorry, Josh, do you have a question?
Yep, we got a question come through. How big of an outfall of water does this detention pond flowing to a conveyance have versus a standard detention only pond?
How much is the flow of water out of that?
I believe that's what the question is, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's 6-inch pipes, and that 6-inch pipe really controls the outflow. And if the water goes up, like say for instance we have a 10-year storm, this obviously isn't going to handle that. So in the case of this particular stormwater device, you can see back here the stone weir that's at the end. The water actually goes over the top of that, And then there's actually another basin of rocks behind that. So it fills up another pool that's behind that before it ever goes any further down that same step pool conveyance system that I showed you. But the actual flow outside that device, I'll take a note of that, and I'll see whether or not I can find that in our stormwater management plan. Okay, so any other questions, Josh? All right, I'm going to try and combine both private and public stormwater maintenance requirements in these same slides. And so in this particular case, the county will come out, because this is a county maintained stormwater management pond, and they have contracted to have somebody come out here 6 times a year, starting in April through October, once a month, to come here and mow the turf around this area. Now, most of the things that you read about these stormwater ponds, they say don't mow the turf. Let it go up, 6 inches, 8 inches high or so. But this is another example for aesthetics. This is right in the middle of the neighborhood. And so the grass gets cut high, but it doesn't get cut like at 8 inches. And so, that is one of the trade-offs. And if you have a stormwater pond that is more recessed within the community, there's a chance, and I've seen plenty of examples of this, they're not going to do any mowing at all. It's just simply going to grow wild in that area and provide the extra filtration of stormwater runoff. Whenever they built these step pool stormwater conveyance systems, they have taken down probably a fair amount of wooded area in order to build these, and they're going to replant them with a lot of different plants, trees, shrubs, a lot of herbaceous plants to provide some of that filtration that I was talking about. And the biggest challenge you're going to have is that you've opened up this area to invasive species, and they will want to smother these nice plants that have been put down there. So that's just one of those things that if you really care, you'll go down and you'll try and do what you can to control the invasive species. The county, again, is not going to do that. And then also, if you do collect any debris in these step pools, if you've got significant sediment because some of the rocks have come loose or whatever, I would clean it out. But if you see, no kidding, damage, and it's not a privately owned one, but it's the county's, I would get the county involved right away, because that is something that they should end up fixing for you. And I would definitely, after a big storm, go through your entire area, public and private, and check to make sure that everything looks good. I borrowed this slide from the Stormwater Success course. You can see it came from Wetland. And I think all you really need to say is, if you have any kind of an embankment, and particularly a dam embankment within your stormwater management plan, if you see animals burrowing into it, if you see erosion like you see down there in the lower left-hand slide, if you see bare spots that is going to cause sedimentation, fix it. And definitely don't put any plants on the top of these embankments or on the sides. All of those things are going to weaken the integrity of that particular device, that particular feature of your stormwater pond. Many of the devices out there, the stormwater devices, have got these markers. In this case, the marker on the left is incremented at every 12 inches. It's in the forebay of the stormwater management ponds, and it's measuring over a period of time how much siltation you're beginning to get within that particular device. And over a period of time, you're actually decreasing the amount of stormwater runoff that can actually be contained within that particular area. I've seen anywhere from when it hits 50% to where it hits around 2/3, of the volume of that particular forebay, that you then have to do some removal of that sediment that's been collected down there at the bottom. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but I'll say it again. This sediment is going to obviously be nasty stuff. It's been coming off the roads. It contains fertilizer. It contains other nutrients, you know, from other things that have been put into the storm drain systems. It is hazardous material that has to be treated as such. And it will require somebody to come out, not only remove it, but they have to have the right place to dispose of it. It's not going to be in those woods behind that particular forebay. Trash racks. All these best management practices have got them. You can see what it should look like on the right-hand slide where the grate is clear. And that is where that low flow pipe is. That's where the water is rushing out when it gets to a certain level. And so on the left-hand side, you can see that water rushing out also creates a nice suction. And at this particular time of year during the late fall, it's sucking up any leaves or other debris that you've got there within your stormwater device. We call the county, they come out and they take care of removing that debris. But if it's private, you need to pay the same attention to it and make sure that that trash grate stays clear. And I put down on here after major storm events about every 2 inches. I think that that's probably a good rule of thumb to go out and take a look again at all your different devices. Anybody who has a stormwater management pond that retains water all year long is probably going to have problems with this algae growth during the summertime. You know, the way that you manage this is by working with your landscaper and trying to use green principles as much as possible with the fertilizers that you put onto the lawns. You try and make sure that whatever fertilizer ends up on driveways or sidewalks gets blown back into the yards so that hopefully it ends up going into the ground and not into the stormwater drainage system. If people are washing their cars, you know, there on the driveways or on the streets, the detergents that they use are going to break down into nutrients that are going to help contribute to this. Dog waste is a big factor in how much of this kind of growth you get during the summertime. So pick up that dog waste and avoid it. But if you follow good principles like what I just talked about right there, chances are you're going to manage this a little bit better. For those of you where a stormwater management pond is a very prominent feature of your community, however, I've seen communities that have put the aeration devices in there and they've got the fountains, the mini fountains that are in the middle. That, of course, is going to help out also with trying to relieve some of this. You know, I had a whole spiel about plant management because if you take a look at different guidance on plant management within these devices, it would lead you to believe that you've got to be doing plant management all the time. But I've been around to a lot of different facilities here in the county, and these are pictures of what they look like. And the one on the left down here, the guy who lives across the street from this says the county's been coming every year now for over a decade in November, and they whack all these Phragmites, which are invasive plants, down to their roots, and they grow back up like this, and they come back the next year and they do the same thing again. So they don't remove them, and Phragmites, very invasive. Their seeds end up going downwind, downstream, and they just reappear all over the place. But if you're like this picture up here on the top, and I don't know who owns this, but the invasive plants, cattails and Phragmites, are actually displacing all of that area where you'd otherwise have that stormwater and helping out with filtering and everything else of the nutrients. In some cases, been to ponds where all of this right here is completely blocked the inflow to this particular outflow device. And so, you know, at a certain point, the county will come in and say, hey, you need to clean this up because it's no longer functioning the way that it was designed to function. And this is kind of an example down here on the bottom of a stormwater pond that is I think it's a detention pond, but I can't be sure unless I looked at the stormwater management plans. And you can see the county is not coming in and mowing this area on the slopes. So bottom line is, if you've got any questions about this, you happen to own one of those. And as I said last night, there's been at least 60 new privately owned stormwater management plans or wetlands that have been constructed since 2015. I would bring a county inspector out and say, hey, give me some advice on this.
So
And,
Steve,
yeah.
we have two questions. One from Mary, who asks, are the lower left and top photos of detention ponds that have transformed somewhat into a wet pond with wet invasives?
Okay, I only got the first part of your question.
Are the lower left and top photos of detention ponds that have transformed somewhat into a wet pond with wet invasives? I think, go ahead.
I'm still not sure I understand the question.
I think
this one was built as a wet pond. I think this one was built as a detention, and this was built as a detention.
And Renee asks, so plants and storm pond facilities are bad even if they were native?
Well, that's a great question, because if you take a look at how these are supposed to be designed, there's actually supposed to be a table down there close to where the normal water line is. And on that table, you would actually be planting aquatic plants, plants that can survive in that wet environment. And they normally recommend that you put 3 different types of plants in there, as you just mentioned, that they be native to Maryland. I have only seen one development that had plants around a table going around the wet pond. Everyone else is like some of those other pictures that I showed you. It just is straight turf right down to the detention area or the retention area. And I tell you, if you are going to put the investment in those plants like I just talked about, there are hardly any ponds that I've been to. I mean, I've been to a couple that have not had them, but most of them have got cattails and phragmites. They're just very invasive. Okay, I pulled this out. This is another step pool stormwater conveyance system. This is in a new community. I don't think that it's actually been accepted yet, but this step pool stormwater conveyance system is actually right in the middle of the community. It's on a steep slope. It takes stormwater that comes right off the road and then allows it to cascade into those different pools across the different levels of rock. And so this is one I'd take anybody to be able to show them, hey, here's what these things look. They could do it safely. But you also want to make sure that you're maintaining these now for sure aesthetically, maintaining the plants, maintaining the herbaceous plants that are going to provide filtering, and then paying attention to any sediment that accumulates in these particular ponds, because these particular ponds do in fact dry in between each one of the rainstorms. And that's one of the things that you'll find again in your stormwater management plan. In some cases, these things were built and designed to actually infiltrate. The ground allows the water to infiltrate into it, and they stay dry. Nobody gets concerned about mosquitoes or anything like that. In other cases, they're going to stay wet almost all year long.
Steve, point of order, we just got a question from Michael. What do you mean when you say the example has not been accepted yet?
The example has not been accepted yet. Did I say that?
Yeah, so I think you were saying that this is a new community.
The community has not been accepted yet. It means that the developer's not finished yet with everything, that that the as-builts haven't been turned in, and that the grading permit is still active. Does that make sense? That is the right answer. Okay, so if you end up having problems, or you think you have issues with any of the county maintained systems, this is really a pretty neat way to bring that to their attention. And It's sometimes called fix. I must have it on here someplace. I do in my notes. I'll come back to that here in just a second. But it's a 311 app. Go on Google Anne Arundel County 311, and it will take you to this particular website. And you do have to register. You can be registered as a guest. And then what this thing allows you to do is choose from a variety of menus, whatever your particular problem is. And this problem was a drainage problem. And I went ahead and I described exactly what the problem was, that one of our low flow pipes didn't appear to be working right. And then the neat thing is you can actually attach an attachment on there. In this case, I used something off of the WPRP application website and showed exactly which best management practice I was talking about in the location. And then you submit it to the county. And I've done this now for a number of different issues. The neat thing is, if you are a subscriber to this site and you're nearby where this particular issue is, you'll get notified. And I was very surprised when I went after I did this particular input. I saw that there had been a number of drainage issues that had been reported in other places. So it kind of gives you an idea of whether or not your particular issue, or at least that particular topic, drainage, is occurring in other places, and you might get educated from that. But I'll tell you, the county has been dynamite on responding to these. I get an answer back fairly quickly that they've received it. They then may have to assign it to a particular office, and they'll tell me that they'll get in touch with me, and they do. And then we also have some kind of official record of the fact that a maintenance action was required and it was taken care of. The folks that are in this office are really good people, and they will also accept phone calls. But I like sharing this information because I think it's educational for people out there that may have similar systems, and it may, prompt them to go out and take a look at the same issue in their own backyard. See, click, fix. See, click, fix. It's all one word. And you can see this is one of my foot stomper slides. Okay, so last night we showed kind of the same picture, that bioretention and bioswales on top of the ground may look a little bit different from one another in size and composition of vegetation and so forth. But the maintenance principles for these are generally the same. And the first thing is mulch. Almost all these facilities end up using mulch. Not all of them, but most of them do. And it's very important that you use hardwood mulch. You don't want anything that's got pine in it or any other kind of wood that is going to end up floating. And it needs to be at least double shredded. And in this picture, we show triple shredded. And the reason for that is because when that particular stormwater device gets inundated with water, it's not going to rise up to the top and float right down into your storm drain. It's going to end up staying there within the device, and it's just going to be a much smarter investment for you to maintain your device. And in fact, pretty much all the stormwater management plans will say double shredded mulch at the very minimum. It should be put in about 2 to 3 inches, and that depth should be enough to be able to control weeds and to also retain moisture for the plants that you have within your particular BMP. Without a doubt, after some of the bigger storms, your mulch is going to get displaced. And as part of our contract, every month, our service providers come in and they will rake around, any of those places where there's been substantial displacement of mulch and even it all back out again. And then you should replenish mulch pretty much on a yearly basis. We've looked before at actually having it, no kidding, collected and taken out. That is not an insignificant expense for them to do that. And I don't know where the mulch goes, but we haven't accumulated any. We add 2 or more inches each year, and it stays pretty much at that depth for the season. I did put on here though, and I think that most people know this. If you Google in mulch calculator, you'll find a number of different landscapers or other folks out there who offer a service where if you know the square footage of your BMP, and yesterday we said in your stormwater management plan, you know the square footage of your BMP, you can use this calculator, put the square footage in, put the depth of mulch that you want to have and type of mulch, and it'll tell you exactly how much in the way of cubic yards you need to have. And then you can go online, find out how much that costs. So when you go out to a contractor, you at least have a starting point. It doesn't include labor and stuff, but you at least have a starting point to see if the bid that they give you is reasonable. Plant diversity, I think I've talked about this at least 3 times, but I'll put a little bit different spin on it this time. Here is a more mature community with a bioswale, and you can see, my guess is that probably their plant mix that they originally had in here was mostly for full sunlight conditions. When these trees were itty bitty, they weren't providing all the shade and stuff that they are now as they've grown up high. And so you're going to have to sometime in the future reconsider what plant mixes you have in there, because the original types of plants, some of them anyway, are not likely to survive in the changed environment. I use the picture here in the middle to show that I'm pretty confident, because I drove around the rest of this neighborhood, there used to be shrubs in this area, and they died and they didn't get replaced. And look at the consequence of the runoff of sediment that you've had right here. And I think that that's a bigger problem than having replaced some of those plants earlier. And then finally, there are really some neat apps out there. I'm just pointing out one of them. But if you go to suncalc.org, this is an app that allows you to position the sun at any time of day, any place in the world, 365 days a year. And you can also change the elevation of whatever point you designate on here. So it takes into account whether or not your BMP is close to large trees or to a townhouse or something like that. And that can begin to help you in your selection of plants. Do they require full sun, partial sun, whatever the case may be? You look at your list of native Maryland plants, it breaks it down into those kinds of categories. And now you have an idea of what you might possibly start talking to a landscaper about or doing a self-help project on. If I was to say my biggest concern with plant management in these BMPs is that they're not cheap, and like most plants, they require water, when you first put them in. And none of these systems come with an irrigation system until it rains. And so if you are planting and you're not getting any rain, there's a good chance you're going to lose a few of those plants. And up there in the top left, I show what's recommended in terms of watering schedules after you've put in new plants. But that is a tough schedule to meet, because down on this lower left-hand side, we went out for several different RFPs on what it would cost to bring in a water tank, and have somebody do it manually. And it is not cheap. And you can put these, horse bags around the trees here, and that will help out a little bit, but not everything that you're planting is a tree. And so you may be, and we've done this before, asking nearby residents to help out with some of the watering chores, but our experience is that that is not the most reliable method of trying to get water on these new plants. So I don't have an answer for you on this. I've told you what our issues have been with this, but I would choose wisely when it is that you plant. And we found waiting until the end of the year has been the option that has worked the best for us in terms of overall plant survivability. And I am not a master gardener. I'm sure that there's some of you out there who are, and you would have better ideas than what I just suggested. I would say that this is unusual to see a BMP looking like this. It's sometimes going to look like this, where it's got lots of weeds, particularly in the summertime, particularly this summer where we had a lot of rain. And as long as this isn't invasive, and this is, grass, crabgrass, you can probably let it go. But again, it's back to the aesthetic value of these BMPs. When they're right in the middle, they're in somebody's backyard or they're right prominent in a common area, you may choose, like we do, to have these things mechanically removed, on a monthly basis, and make the garden look just like what you'd expect it to look in your front yard if you cared about your plants and appearance. We do, though, use integrated pest management strategies. We just don't automatically have them come out on a schedule to spray for pests or any other disease that we might see on the plants. As soon as we see some indication of it, then we call the folks to come out, take a look at it, and decide what the best treatment is for it. And then your cleaning goes late into the season because the leaves are going to fall off, and it just seems like that the BMPs are a natural collection point for all the leaves. They go underneath all of the different plants that you have out there. You got to get them out. And if you don't, then what happens is they will go into your storm drains, collect in your catch basins, and maybe some of them will make it out, into your stormwater management ponds or whatever outflow devices you have within your community. And then you got to clean it out from there. One thing that I would strongly recommend is, in addition to not using any sand, particularly if you've got those pervious surfaces there from your parking areas, but don't use road salt, particularly those communities where the water is going right off the road directly into the BMP, because that road salt is going to end up killing your plants. And then here's another picture. I showed one yesterday of a storm event. So this particular BMP is filled up during this big storm. Come back within 72 hours, and this is pretty much how it should look. But you can see that I got some sediment from this storm. If you walked around here, you would also find that the mulch is displaced. I've got some debris back in here. And so you just go through and clean that up, get a flat shovel, scrape out the sediment that was there, fill it over with some mulch, and that's it. You've done some pretty good preventative measures right there to keep your device working properly. And so what are all of these white pipes that are sticking up? Those are observation wells. They look down into that 4-6-inch perforated pipe that you have down below your bioretention areas and maybe bioswales. And you take a look down into those 48 hours after a storm or so, and it should look like this. You don't want to see debris down there. You don't want to see it filled up with water. If it's filled up with water, that's not good, because that means that the water is not exiting the BMP through that perforated pipe down there like it should. And it's probably your first indication that you may have some clogging issues. And you're either going to need to get them cleaned out. No, you're going to have to get them cleaned out, or you're going to have a growing problem because you'll have continued backup within that system. I would not have thought about this, but you probably do a soil analysis on your turf around your community. You're sure that you do it on your own lawns, and you determine whether or not the pH is out of balance, and then you correct it to make sure that your plants and your turf go the way that they should. We have not done this within our BMPs, but I'm going to do it because we just contracted to do it for our common area turf, and then said, well, shoot, we've got some plants that aren't looking all that great within our BMPs. Maybe we should also test the soil in there. Recommendation is you do it about every 3 years. And then you probably need to make sure that it's not going to rain when you have the treatment done. And maybe the treatment is not all done at one time, depending upon just how out of balance you are with your pH. Make sure you've got a good firm doing this with a soil analysis and also the right folks that are going to treat it. And then if you need to, consider fertilizing. This is our most recurring problem, and in walking around other neighborhoods, I would say that there are many that have the same problem, and that is just maintaining good turf. It has to be done on a regular basis. The picture on the left is a bare spot just right in front of one of the stormwater management ponds, and you can see on the right-hand side, same thing. You got to have good filtering turf going into those other BMPs instead of sediment. And so in this one project, we spent almost $6,600. Maybe it doesn't sound like a big deal for some of the larger communities, but for us, that's a fairly big dent out of our budget. And that's just for that one remediation project. That doesn't include what we're already paying to maintain the BMPs throughout the year. So you have to budget for that. And, you got to be persistent, because not all this grass is going to grow up. It depends upon the weather conditions, and you got to have a backup plan. I can't say enough. I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but if you have somebody different maintaining your BMPs than cutting your lawns out there, and I know it's different for every community. In ours, the same landscaper cuts everybody's yard. In other communities, you've got multiple landscapers or individual homeowners taking care of their yards. But they all need to be aware that these BMPs are actually functioning water management devices. You don't take your grass clippings and toss them into the BMP. You don't have somebody do landscape work at your house and take any of the excess dirt from that project and then dump it into the BMP. We've had all that. I'm sure some of you have had that in your areas as well. They are not places to dispose material in. And so your landscapers also need to know that they don't run their big equipment through that area either and cause issues with rutting or any of that other kind of stuff that would affect performance. Okay, we're already at the end here, and I've just got a couple more slides to go, but this is a foot stomper. If you don't have a good maintenance checklist to reference already, and remember, in your stormwater plans, there should be an operations and maintenance plan, then I would go on to the county website, WPRP, and they've got checklists that are down at the bottom of their main page, and it covers checklists for most of the different types of BMPs that we've talked about. And you'll see that it gives you a schedule for how often you should be doing certain tasks. And then it'll also give you a PDF sheet here that puts into plain English some of the things that are indicated on this chart. But here's another foot stomper slide. If you're really serious about your program, I would sit down and I would put a spreadsheet together, and I would list the different types of BMPs you have and what you think the tasks are that need to be done throughout the year and when they need to be done, frequency during the spring, summer, or fall, or whatever, and do this based upon the checklist that I just talked about or other information sources you can get online about maintaining your systems. If you do this, this is going to set the stage for that request for proposal that you're going to eventually do with your service provider. And the chances are you're going to have to back off from some of this because you may not be able to afford all of this. I'm going to talk about that on Saturday morning. I'm going to show you just how widely different the proposals were that we got back from our RFP. But at least start off with an understanding of what you think you want and the frequency that you want to have it. And then be ready to work with your service provider on what risk you might accept because of limitations on price. And of course, some of this can be done by volunteers. You know, if you can get volunteers to come out and do watering or weeding or something like that, then that, of course, is going to help reduce your costs. And in smaller communities, I would say that that is not a bad option. Okay, stormwater issues. All I would say about this is these are county-owned facilities. If you see water bypassing your forebay into your main pond, it's actually going through the ground instead of over the ground, then you've got a problem. If you see something like this where severe erosion is causing all of this sedimentation here inside the forebay, there's a problem. Here's a weak embankment with all of this sediment here, that's a problem. And here's a trash rack again. Dial 311. In our community, we have problems because we got lots of steep slopes with erosion. You can see what was happening here to this BMP. They come out and they put a blanket over it, some straw with some seed, and actually for $2,000, we got a pretty good repair job out of it. But we've had to do this in multiple locations of our community, all of them small projects at a time, whatever we could fit within our budget. Here's some other projects. The ones that are in green are ones that we prepared for. The ones in white were surprise. We had to do some erosion repair from some storms, $1,100 for 3 different patches that had to be fixed. We had a tree fall down. It was in one of those publicly maintained ponds. It took a year to get it removed because the county had to, wait for the money, wait for the contract, but it didn't cost us anything. For this particular project, to fix water that's bypassing the stormwater management facility, $1,550 was the estimate. To do some grading repair work where we had ponding, about $2,000. And we went to the county because we wanted to fix this problem here. The water is bypassing the device, going across the sidewalk into the street. In the wintertime, this freezes, becomes a safety hazard. This is a very public sidewalk. This is what the engineering diagram looks like in our stormwater management plan. Our landscaper, who we've been working with a long time, came up with this cartoon drawing of, what the proposed fixes for this were. And it really was not very difficult. I mean, it was to basically rechannel the water in the middle using some river rock and make sure it flowed down the BMP the way that it was supposed to. This was not an acceptable diagram to the county. We had an on-site meeting with county inspectors. They suggested some changes that we might make to get it through the process. Not we've lost interest in it, but the board's only got so much energy and there's other new problems popping up. It's still on our list of to-dos, but that money was swallowed up some time ago by other needs. So we'll come back and we'll eventually, fix this. But you'd think it's a minor problem, easy fix, not always. All right, so these are the foot stoppers that I had out for tonight, just like last night. Get familiar with that County 311 app. I think it's pretty cool. The maintenance plan, build it off the DP checklist, and maybe spend a little time, no kidding, putting together a spreadsheet. I'll talk again on Saturday how that spreadsheet will transform into a better RFP for your service providers. So I greatly apologize. I have gone past the time that we planned for tonight. Let me get out of this view here. And Josh, do you have some questions for me?
No new questions. I think we're good.
Okay. When we go into tomorrow's session or Saturday morning session, if you're able to make it, this is where we will be talking about this kind of expenses that you can anticipate. And I'll just say off the bat, it is so different from one community to the next. We've covered a lot of different types of devices. And so where I'm sitting here talking about my personal expenses there, you're already going through your head and saying, okay, I got so many devices of this particular kind. How difficult can this be? And so don't join us if you already feel that way, because you probably got a pretty good handle on it. But I'm going to be giving you some lessons learned on Saturday that may turn what from otherwise would appear to be a simple task into something that you'll be surprised how complicated it is. Just like that example I just used for the modifications. Never in the world would I've imagined that would have just gone right through the system. And so, we don't all share the same experiences. We deal with different people at different times. And I'll grant, we've got some very good people in the county that are very conscientious about their jobs. But if you take a look at the turnover in the offices, it's no different than turnover of HOA folks. And so I really do think no matter what your experiences are, that you'll learn something on Saturday morning if you can afford the time. Any parting shots from anybody? Okay, Josh, I'm going to try and stay online tonight afterwards. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.